Yeah, go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Dale Sorensen. On behalf of the Adult Education Program at First United, I welcome you today for a very special program. We have with us a neighbor who spent his adult years and his career in our neighborhood as a practicing psychologist, but he's also done research before he got to Oak Park that he'll share with us. Dr. Roger Lupei is going to talk to us about suicide. And when I asked Roger about how to sell this, he wrote these words for me, which I think are quite beautiful. To protect ourselves from this tragedy of suicide, we avoid talking about it. This avoidance stifles the development of a vocabulary. So, at least for an hour, we are going to talk about it. And I'm glad that we're in the hands of Roger Lupei.
When I hear that, I can't believe I wrote that. I probably plagiarized it. But it reminds me of, there's a book out on the Golden Gate Bridge, something leaked, and that bridge was built in 1937, and it was an incredible engineering feat, beautiful art deco. But for 70 years, the second week it was open, a World War I vet leaked to his death. And after that, there was 2 or 3 in a month for the next 70 years. And the people in San Francisco, they just wouldn't deal with it. They wanted the bridge to be the way it was. If we built a fence, it would ruin it aesthetically. Engineering, it may cause more not wind damage, but resistance. And every time they came up with, look, we got all these people jumping, and it's 250 feet. It's a certain depth. Unless you go straight down perpendicularly, then you might live. Otherwise, every bone in your body is crushed. I mean, it's terrible. But it's kind of a clean suicide, too. Your loved ones don't need to pick up the mess or clean up the mess. Somebody else may find the body, they may not. But the incredible denial of it, and not coming to grips with it, and realizing the reality of what these folks are going through, and then doing something about it. So they finally have. The book I'm reading, they haven't yet, but I think 2018 they put in a steel net, which when you fall into it, you're going to hurt yourself, but you're not going to die. So they've taken care of that finally. The denial is huge in this area. Now, I'm sure everyone here has probably come here for their own reason. Maybe this is what you do on Sunday mornings. Maybe you're just curious about the topic. Perhaps you're a survivor, meaning someone you knew or loved killed themselves. Or perhaps you even struggle with the impulse yourself. I understand that, and if you want to share, I encourage you to do so. However, I am a retired clinical psychologist. I'm no longer licensed. I'm no longer insured. So I cannot respond to you in a clinical way. But I'm sure that whatever you have to say, questions or comments about your own life, could be helpful to everyone. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a retired clinical psychologist. Dale covered most of it. I got interested in suicide. I can say I've had suicide in my brain for almost 50 years. But it's been a studying sort of cognitive process. I was at the Oklahoma State University pursuing a PhD, and in order to get that doctorate, you have to do a research study. So I did a summer internship at the Department of Corrections in Oklahoma City. And I discovered, with the help of another person, that there were 12 to 13 suicides in these city and county jails, not prisons, city and county jails, a year. 12 a year. That's like 10, 15 times the norm, which is about 13 per 100,000. We'll get into that a little later. So I had organized, and I didn't even remember how I did this, but I organized a system whereby when there was a suicide, they'd call me and they would call the jail and say I was coming out, and I'd go out there and interview everybody, person who admitted him, the person who took care of him, the sheriff who was in charge, to gather information about their behavior, and was there anything that would tell us that this person was high risk for suicide. I might just get into that. Now, we'll get into that study later if we have time. Let's get into this. I want to talk about the myths that cloud our thinking and make our understanding and response to suicide less effective. So the first one...
There's a legal aid piece of...
Yeah, okay. The first one is women suicide much more than men. Now, this is true and it's not true. Men are 4 or 5 times more likely to kill themselves than women. Women are 15 or 20 times more likely to attempt but not die. So yes and no, depending on what your definition of suicide is, which we're going to be talking about. Suicide can put a bad idea into your head. That's not true. In fact, talking about it can be very helpful. I'll tell you a little story. 3 weeks ago, I was sitting at a cafeteria in my gym, FSC, eating something, and somebody came up to me and said, "Can I talk to you?" And I thought, man, how did they find me? And I said, yeah, sure. I didn't know who he was. He sat down and he said, I'm gonna start crying. And I thought, who is this guy? Well, it turns out I go to the steam room every time I finish working out, and I was in there with another psychologist, and we were talking about suicide. I don't remember if it was this study or another study or his study, but he was in the steam room, and he started talking to me. He said his wife wanted to divorce him, and he didn't want it, and it led to him feeling depressed and suicidal. And he found himself walking out in traffic and just passively saying, "If you take me, you take me." This is kind of what I call a very passive suicide attempt. I didn't get hit. But he said, in hearing you talk about suicide, it made me realize there's people there that care and are trying to help. And the next day, he made an appointment with a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist, in fact, when he was talking to me, he had to leave because he had an appointment with a psychiatrist. So, talking about suicide, contrary to this myth, is quite interesting. I was very gratified by that, even though I didn't really have anything to do with it, purposefully, that is. It's an easy way out to cop out. There's nothing easy about suicide. There's a lot of pain. As one person put it, psych-ache. He made up that word. We'll talk about him in a little bit. But it's not easy. It can go on forever. And that brings me to the next one. It's an impulsive act with little thought. There's a lot of thought going into suicide. A lot of painful thought. As well as a lot of painful emotions. If you block their means, they will just find another way. That's not true. It's amazing how people who are suicidal will get fixated on one method. So if you take the gun and lock it up, it's not like they got to go get pills or jump off a bridge. They were fixated on that method, and it really ruins their game and can actually save their life. By the way, suicide is one of the few ways of death that can be prevented. There's a lot of others with dedication to that, but you can prevent it if you're sensitive to it. It's an act of revenge striking against another. This is rarely the case. Suicide is not used for revenge. It is an attempt to escape a lot of pain. The last one, and there's a lot more myths, by the way. Thomas Joyner has a book out called The Myths of Suicide. And his father committed suicide. It's a good book, and I'll get into some of his theory. And the truth is in the note. Well, the truth is there's very rarely notes. And the notes are not necessarily the truth. I mean, they're in a state of mind, and we'll get into that, but they're not in a state of mind where they can explain it clearly. Any questions? Okay. We're going to go to definition. Definition of suicide, purposely taking one's life, actions designed to kill oneself. Now, you see a lot of people who do stuff that could very well lead to death, but they don't have that in mind. Like I wrote here, temperamentally reckless, thrill seekers without a regard for consequences. These guys are just thrill seekers. People who use very potent drugs, they just enjoy their drug. They're not necessarily trying to kill themselves. There may be some suicidal ideation there, and they may be toying with it. If that's the case, that is a type of suicide. But somebody who just drives recklessly, that's not suicidal. Overeating, smoking, no, that's not suicidal. Suicidal, there's 3 types of suicide that I've broken down. 1, 2, 3. Suicidal ideation, that's thinking specifically about ending your life. That's 1.0. You can go 1.01 or 1.2 or 1.3 as you add more risk factors to the ideation. One's age is very important, which we'll get into. If it's a very active fantasy or thought, then that's more than 1. That's creeping toward 2, which is attempted suicide. If the thoughts involve a highly lethal method, if you're thinking about pills or you're thinking about a gun, or thinking about jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, there's a distance between those 3. And it brings you closer to 2. And then we'll get into perturbation and constriction. But being perturbed and having narrow thoughts and not being good at problem solving, that brings you closer to attempting purposive actions toward ending one's life. Now, there is the idea that people do this to manipulate, and I'm not comfortable with that. I'm sure it does happen, but for the most part, it's thoughts about ending your life because your life is painful. Again, get into passive active methods, high lethality, and how perturbed and how constricted are the thoughts. It's going to bring you closer to completing suicide. There's a lot of sensitivity about the language that we use. I've been reading in the literature that they don't want to see you say commit because it sounds like a crime. I guess. And at one time it was a felony in every state in this country and in Europe. In fact, King Louis XIV, he would take the body of a suicide victim, parade them through the village with their face down, put them up on some kind of hanging device and leave them up there, and then confiscate all their possessions, and perhaps even the family's possessions, as kind of a deterrent method. And yeah, if you're thinking about suicide, think about your family kind of thing. Rough stuff. But anyway, so this is the worst possible thing that could happen to you as a survivor. The worst possible thing that could happen to the victim is to die by suicide. Or perhaps it was better than the life he had. I don't know. But the second most difficult thing that you're going to go through as a survivor is grieving. And I'm pretty sure most people in the field would say grieving has to deal with facts about what happened. A psychological autopsy can be helpful to eliminate negative sequelae, things that can happen. And what I mean by that is survival guilt can be a big thing. If you're a friend or a loved one, you got to be thinking, what could I have done differently? If they died of cancer, you probably took them to the clinic and all that stuff, but if they died suddenly at their own hands, you have to be thinking, what did I do wrong? What didn't I do that I could have helped? There can be more suicidal activity within the family. This can be sort of contagious. Or the guilt can prompt you to think, maybe I should take my life. And then there's the stigma and shame that survivors struggle with. Okay, questions? Comments? Anything you can relate to? Yes, ma'am?
Talk more about the contagion. I come from a family where there was suicide and other people continued to attempt it.
You did. You tell me about the contagion.
Oh, well, my father was a suicide,
How old was he when he did that?
34.
That's young.
Yes.
Do you have any idea why he did it?
Oh, I have my own ideas, but I invented them all. I was 11 when it happened. But his sister made repeated suicide attempts, and I've always wondered if that wasn't a sort of contagion within a family.
Yeah, so it was in his family. His sister and he had suicidal issue. She attempted. She didn't complete though.
No, she tried several times.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if that's learned or genetic. I have no idea. And was there a message sent to the children along some lines that I'm not even sure what it would be? But yeah, there's contagions within families. There's contagions within geographic areas. Yeah. I'm not sure of the numbers, but I've seen that. You had your hand up.
Did I understand correctly? Men are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than women,
Yep.
although women attempt it more than men.
Yep. I've got a lot of thoughts about that. And my wife told me, if you say this, you tell them I disagree. And that is, I'm going out on a limb here. I was at the park the other day watching these kids play. There were 2 10-year-olds, 9-year-olds, and they had this little device that you pull it and you let go and it goes flying. And there's a girl and a boy. Every time the boy did it, pull out, this thing would go way up in the air, travel 70 yards. And 9 times out of 10, when the girl did it, she pulled back, it would go bam. So he was obviously more adept physically.
Yeah.
And I think suicide is a very physical activity in a lot of ways. So even though my wife disagrees, I think guys are more physically, I don't want to say gifted. And she pointed out to me that, science, technology, engineering, and math scores are the same for girls and boys. She's a school psychologist. But probably boys are encouraged to go into more hands-on physical engineering, although I think those numbers are changing. Because I know I've met a lot of women who are engineers too. But I think there's something about men being physical. I'll get into this now. Thomas Joyner, his theory is that a person who commits suicide is feeling cut off from people. They no longer have the contacts they did. They have somehow got the feeling that they would be better off dead to their family if they're a burden. But the third thing, which is really interesting, I think comments on the men, is a fearlessness of pain, injury, and death. And how do you get that? I mean, that's a good thing to have, fear of pain, injury, and death. So it keeps us alive and avoiding the flame and all that stuff. Well, he said that certain experiences will contribute to a fearlessness of pain, injury, and death. For example, I have a friend who's a Vietnam vet. He was in the jungle and shot twice and was shooting at people all the time. I'll tell you a little bit more about him because it's an irony. So war, is this okay? Okay, war veterans. The Tour de France is an annual event. It's been on for 60 years, and it's grueling to train for, and it's dangerous. People got killed in it. There's accidents and clusters. I think it's 2,200 miles in high altitude. So it really kicks your butt. Strangely enough, out of the 60 people who have placed first, 3 and probably 4 have died of suicide. Now that's a high number, and it probably has something to do with the experiences they've had and the fearlessness they've developed over injury, pain injury, and there's been several people who've died of other, like accidents, I think heart attacks too. So it's a really grueling experience. I was in Cuba a few weeks ago, and I was on the beach, actually the Gulf of America. And I was watching two girls on the beach play, and I was watching two boys in the water play. And the girls were getting these buckets and building these things and talking about what they were doing, affiliating. The boys, who were about 9 or 10, they were shoving each other, they were spitting at each other, they were splashing water at each other. I mean, boys roughhouse. And they get used to that kind of stuff. There's a certain status or pride in it. And by the way, when they finished, they kind of walked out of the water holding hands. So that was amazing. But I see that kind of thing too, and it tells me that men are being, I don't know, they can deal with this issue and go through with it more easily because they've developed a fearlessness of pain, injury, and death. That's kind of wild, but I think it's you got to account for men being 4 or 5 times more likely to kill themselves.
When you gave that statistic, I immediately assumed men more frequently have guns and use them.
I think you're right. Another interesting thing is, if you look at different states, Wyoming has one of the highest rates. If you compare it to Illinois or whatever, I think Wyoming is 20 or 22 per 100,000. Now, we are, as a nation, 14 per 100,000. But when you look at that, men are 20, a little more 20.8 per 100,000. Women are about 5. So that's why I say we're about 4 times more likely to die.
So methodology, the method chosen.
The lethality of the method.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's a big thing. So if you have a gun, there's no way you're going to survive that.
Well, there have been people that have, but if you do it like Hemingway and put it in your mouth, yeah, you're not going to survive that. I was going to say something. Yeah, and women choose a less lethal method. But here's the deal. University of Colorado just came out with a study where they've seen a rapid increase in suicides. It went from 39,000 to 50,000 in this country between the late 1990s and 2022. You got that numbers? 1990s. Anyway, when I first saw that, I thought, like, damn internet, and all that garbage you see, and how you withdraw from people, and it's just toxic. It's suicidogenic, if you will. And then I thought, what else? I had another theory. Oh, doesn't matter. Well, it turns out what they, I don't know if I'm going to say speculated, what they found was the increase in suicides, particularly with women, correlated with the introduction of Oxycontin and other high-potent medications that are being prescribed. That makes sense. Women might take, I think fentanyl too probably contributed a lot to that.
Accidental suicide.
I'm sorry?
Accidental suicide with fentanyl.
It could be, or it could be a suicide attempt that otherwise wouldn't have led to death. Yeah. They called it an increase in suicide. They also felt that the government, with the 2009 bank bailout, what's going on there with mortgages, they took money from a source that was being contributed to down and out people, millions, and they put it in the funds that they could then bail out banks. And so they felt that had a little bit to do with it too. Any other questions? Yes?
Is there any generational differences, and I don't mean age, because I look around and I feel like my kid's generation has more suicides than my generation. Do you know what I'm saying?
Suicide thoughts,
No,
attempts,
actual
completions.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, there has been an increase from 39,000 to 50,000. It went from 10 per 100,000 to 14. So yes, recently there has been an increase. Does that have anything to do with the world they're dealing with? I don't know. You know, it's just funny, the jail suicide study I did, I had several variables that I was looking at, like previous suicide attempts, intoxication, agitation, delirium tremors, but I also naively had tattoos. Back then when I was, you got a tattoo because you're in the Navy or you're in prison. Today everybody's got it. So it doesn't have anything to do with suicide. So I would say, yeah, there's something there.
But also my children's generation, they do like the more self-mutilation things, like tattoos, like tons of piercings. I teach with, that sort of younger generation, and there's a lot of tattoos. And in dentistry, we look at it as self-mutilation. So I was just wondering that there's some kind of a correlation with
Yeah,
the generation.
I think it's more fashion than it is masochism. Somebody, yes?
Yeah, my niece's husband hung himself. I think his little girl was maybe 9. Anyway, I felt that it was very selfish, a very selfish act for a man who had a family to do that. The interesting thing is that he was putting together a grill, all the little bits and pieces and everything, and he'd been working on that the night before, and the next day he kills himself. It just, I thought there was a lot of selfishness in there.
Well, you're saying two different things here. One, it seemed like he had a purpose to live. Well, that's not much of a purpose, but it is toward life. I mean, you're building that, then you're going to have food, your family's going to eat it, etc. He hung himself.
In the basement.
Yeah. I can see why you feel that way. Certainly can. But you're bringing up I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I have this sort of, I came in a little late, so maybe you've already said something about this, but I have this sort of reaction when you said about women trying more often but being less successful.
So my wife.
Could you repeat what she said? Could you?
Am I not being loud enough? Boy, I almost never get accused of that. It occurs to me that women may have a stronger sense of responsibility to their responsibilities.
To the family?
Family or whatever it is, that whatever the discomfort or pain or struggle, they have to stick with it. They got to get through it because they've got responsibilities. And I don't know if there's anything to that, but it does seem to me, family being, high among those, that they're more used to subjugating their own needs to whatever somebody else needs.
Even to the point where their need to die.
Yes, where they understand that they are inflicting a problem on whoever is left, and they don't want to do that.
Well, I think women are much more capable of empathy and compassion than us dumb
Well, they're
men.
more practiced at it. I don't know about capable. I mean,
That's a good point.
Your wife has trained you well.
they're more practiced at it and maybe called upon more. Society expects it and blah, blah. There's myriad things that go into that.
Well, there are tasks too, raising children.
That's right.
My daughter just came in from Denver with her 2 children, 8 months and 2 years. I'm just blown away by how attuned she is to those kids.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think the other side of that coin that Ann has just tried to describe is that men can experience a greater sense of failure. I'm not earning enough. I'm not providing enough. I'm not sufficient. I'm failing, which could lead to suicidal thoughts.
Shame.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
My aunt, she was the baby of her family of 6 sisters. She struggled, they called it manic depression. She was seriously.
Yeah, that's a wicked illness.
And she maintained, going with what Ann said, she had 2 children. She kept it together until they were sort of high school age. Then she attempted suicide 4 or 5 times, slicing her wrists. And she always did it when someone was going to find her, which I found, my mother thought that was very interesting. I'm hearing this anecdotally because I was my mother's daughter, but she was always found. And then she went to pills because she got tired of slitting her wrists. Ultimately, they managed her depression with pills, and then she died later of Alzheimer's. She lasted a long time, but she put her family through hell when the children were older. She maintained it when they were little.
Let me tell you about the suicide risk factors and protective factors. First, the risk factors. And I'll talk about demographic data. I hope I don't bore you. But age, how old you are, is an important factor. The older you get, the more likely you're going to suicide. Somebody who's 80 years old. And by the way, first of all, if you're a Caucasian male, you're 4 to 5 times greater in suicide than the rest of the population. And if you're 80 years old, which I'm not quite, but I'm approaching, have medical conditions like pain, ambulatory issues, if you live alone, lost your spouse, military veteran, like our Golden Gate Bridge dude. Let me tell you about a friend I have. He's 77. His name's Larry, and he just lost his wife 2 years ago. He has serious ambulatory issues. He can hardly walk. And he was a Vietnam veteran. When he was 18 years old, he joined the Marines, shipped him to Vietnam. First he had to learn how to shoot an M16. Went over there, was in the jungle for 2 or 3 months, was wounded. They shipped him to Germany. He was hospitalized for I don't know how long. And then when I finally said, "You're all good," he said, "So I'm going home?" They said, "No, you go back to Vietnam." So they shipped him back to Vietnam, all patched up, and he got wounded a second time. Yeah. This time they sent him back to the States, they patched him up, and I believe they discharged him. So here we have a guy who's 77, lost his wife, living alone, medical conditions, post-traumatic stress times 2, and he's not suicidal. Now, why is that? Well, I've hung out with Lou quite a bit because I, on occasion, go to the same cigar shop that he goes. But every morning, Monday through the whole week, he gets up at 11 o'clock, he's at the cigar shop. And he's got a lot of friends there, most of whom really look up to him for his service. He's a smart guy. And he wears a Marine veteran's hat. So he's very identified with being a Marine and a Vietnam veteran. And there's several vets at that cigar shop too. And every once in a while they lapse into some, war stories. And it's kind of nice to hear. He's also religious. And it's been found that religion can shrink the number of completed suicides. I'm not so sure it shrinks the ideation, but people are less likely to commit suicide if they're religious. So anyway, he's religious, he's got his buddies at the cigar shop, he's got his identification with the Marines and being a Vietnam vet, and I think that gives him a certain amount of pride and affiliation that wipes out all these other risk factors, or protective factors. And that can make a difference between life and death. Any questions? Yes?
A few minutes ago, you used the word shame.
Yeah.
Now, it's my observation that if you use that word in most circles, Oak Park circles at least, that would not be, people would say, why do you use the word shame? That sounds like a 19th century emotion, right? Well, I'm saying that I'm not saying there's not shame there, I'm saying it's something that we're uncomfortable with. And so we don't use the word often. So somebody, you might be talking about a delicate public issue, but if you use the word shame, they say, well, there's no shame, we just need to understand it. Okay, sorry it's a long introduction. I just feel like suicide is associated, the emotion of shame is still virulent on the subject of suicide.
Let me say
And
this.
so I'm just asking you to respond. So I think it's kind of unusual. There are a lot of social issues that we're saying we're trying to make progress on, and we talk about them and we promote them. Suicide is still kind of, well, we start out by saying we don't like to talk about it. But I think it's, underneath it is, shame is still very active.
Well, that can be part of it, okay? I had this thought the other day, and I'm going to run it past you. Every person we would like to think is unique. There's something unique about every one of us. Now, there's a lot of similarities. We got 2 ears, 2 eyes, speak through our mouth. Go on and on and on about similarities, but I would like to think that each and every one of us is unique. And I begin to think that each and every completed suicide is unique too. There's a lot of similarities, perturbation, constriction of your thoughts. Depression accompanies 95% of the suicides. So there's a lot of commonality, but there's a lot of specificity. For example, I told you age, medical condition, living alone, loss of spouse, military vet, also financial and employment instability. Now, there's a lot of that going on in the government. People losing their jobs, losing their insurance. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some trouble there. But each and every one of these little risk factors isn't necessarily in everybody's life. I don't know what the amount and the specifics are, but also there's, like I said, there's government jobs instability. Criminal arrests can be a risk factor. Homeless, LGBT, those are all risk factors. Then you get into the psychiatric risk factors. Major depression, 95% of them. Sense of hopelessness, life will not get better. Feeling helpless, the bipolar, it's very, the thing about bipolar, what's built in that is depression, which is horrible, but then it's bipolar, meaning you get agitated. So they got the worst of both worlds there. Anorexia, eating disorder, that is high rate. Schizophrenia, particularly paranoid type with delusions. They could be thinking that they're being told to kill themselves, or to first kill your wife and then kill yourself, the delusion. Drug abuse, excessive alcohol use, and the biggest predictor of suicide is previous attempts. So I told you about Larry. The protective factors, and I'm sure there are more than I'm going to tell you, but adequate community medical and mental health services. If the services are there, and they, or you can get they to go there, they're going to be a lot better off. Meaningful, supportive relationships. That's a very important protective factor. If lost, you're in trouble. Feeling connected to institutions, community, work, or in the case of Larry, military. So you feel this connection and identification, and it gives you meaning in your life, which is going to make that impulse to end your life less. And like I said, religious pursuits. Yeah. Any questions or comments?
I just wanted to say my nephew completed suicide 5 years ago and had been struggling with bipolar disorder for more than 7 or 8 years. Had experienced 4 hospitalizations the year before he got it. Was having big changes in medications and his main therapist and so on. But his completed suicide, I thought, came from the impulsivity of bipolar disorder, mania, meeting a depression. And it was an opportunity right there for him. And the day before, he had talked to my brother. You know, everything was fine. He had taken his car in to get the oil change. So no indication whatsoever, other than the long-term arc of what bipolar depression and mania can do. And I've seen that, you know, I run a support group on Tuesday nights for friends and family of bipolar disorder. And you hear a lot about ideation. So it's, and the other thing I wanted to address, somebody was saying, you know, the selfishness of it. Selfishness in that is a part of bipolar disorder. It's you're narcissists when you're experiencing symptoms, both on the upside and the downside. So you can't judge when a person commits complete suicide, I think. You can't judge where their mental state is. How many of us can actually get into it, even with neurotypical people? How close can we get to somebody else and understand their thinking?
Well, I can tell you this, constriction, it will go to selfishness. You're only thinking about your pain, and you're not thinking about alternative solutions. You're thinking about your pain and escaping through death. So from their point of view, or from somebody who is not a survivor of that, you can empathize with that. But if somebody who is a survivor of it, and you feel like he left his family in dire straits, I can see how you would see them as both constricted in pain and selfish. We can suspend more than one thought about a person, which is sometimes a good thing. I was going to say something. Did I say anything about ambivalence? Because you just touched on it. And you were talking about your family member putting together a barbecue and then killing himself, going in the basement and hanging. People who suicide are ambivalent. They want to live and they want to die. And you can see it played out like with Edwin Schneidman. He was a psychologist back in 1958. He worked at the Los Angeles Veterans Hospital. And he came up with the idea of ambivalence, that we could want to die and want to live at the same time. He also came up with those terms, perturbation and constriction and lethality and ambivalence. These were terms. He was clarifying, he was looking through notes, suicide notes, and then he started interviewing attempters, and he came up with these concepts that weren't in existence until he came along. He was a great, he was a neologist, meaning he'd make up terms, and one of his was psych-ache. Psych-ache, yeah. But he started the American Association of Suicidologists. Yes, there is a word, suicidologist. They have an organization, I belonged to it for years. They have a journal called Suicide and Life-Threatening Behavior, and it's where a lot of research on suicide goes. And they're still around. They have a website. And if you want any information on grieving or dealing with a suicidal partner, I suggest go to their website. There's a lot of good literature there. American Association of Suicidologists. Oh, by the way, I probably didn't notice, but there's some mugs over there, $15 a piece, which goes to the Suicidal Lifeline, 988. $15. You can donate. I'll donate that for you. Those were made by me, by the way. So check it out. Okay, I talked about Thomas Joyner and fearlessness about pain. Edwin Schneidman in his perturbation, constriction, lethality, and ambivalence. Oh, a man, Emil Durkheim, he was a sociologist back in the 1800s, and he thought suicide came out of a lack of integration into your culture or society. You were just out there, you weren't part of it, you weren't connected. Yes?
And so demographically, different cultures, of course, have different suicide rates,
Yes.
right? And Caucasians have higher than African Americans, and Japanese have higher, I'm told, than Caucasians. Yeah, any theories about that?
Well, with the Japanese, there's some kind of perverse idea of honor.
To his point about
Yeah.
honor and failure is if you don't meet your obligations, you're a failure.
Yeah, they also had kamikaze pilots in World War II. And that goes along with kind of like terrorist bombers. I was reading the other day that they feel that they're better off dead than alive because they're going to help their government. But also, they can bring along 20 relatives to paradise without having to go through a check-in. But anyway, some people did some research on that, and I don't know how they did it, but they found that those terrorists who did suicide bombing had other issues, like what I was describing, depression, family problems, whatever. They weren't just great people living a good life. So they played on that. Okay, ambivalence. I don't think I said this, but I did stop me. Back to the Golden Gate Bridge. There's been over 2,000 deaths there since 1937. But that has slowed down. 22 people have lived. So they must have done something like this. And they interviewed all of them. And all 22 of them said, as soon as they jumped, they regretted what they did. And they lived, fortunately. But I'll bet 18, 19, 20, 2,000 of those other people perhaps had the same thoughts. So that's that ambivalence emerging that was clouded by a lot of other factors. Perturbation, constriction. Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about the problems of people who the survivors of suicide?
Yeah, I think I mentioned one first thing is survival guilt. I think you have to question, what could I have done differently? What did I do that provoked this? I mean, you're just in a desperate position that to escape your own pain and your own misattributions about your part of it. And so there's probably a lot of going on there that's distorted, not only by the trauma of losing that person, but all the feelings that you have about it and trying to figure it out. So I think survival guilt is something that probably everybody needs help with. The stigma of having a family in which some person suicided, I think there's a lot of that goes on. And with stigma, I think ignorance goes along with stigma too. Because there's some very real reasons why this person ended their life. It's not that he's a bad person. He was suffering. And he had limited resources psychologically. He wasn't a problem solver. And the whole thing came crashing in. So it's not a bad person. But other people will avoid you if you're a survivor. If you have good friends, they won't. But I think it's natural. And then the possibility of contagion can go on.
So is there anybody who works with survivors?
I'm sure there's survivor groups, yes. If you go to American Association of Suicide, or call 988. 888? 988. Pardon me?
988.
Thank you. I can't get that right. So yeah, if you call 988, I'm sure you'll find something. Yes?
I was just wondering about the actual, what's present, okay, I'll just I'll tell you what I'm thinking. My daughter had a high school boyfriend who went to Cornell. And then I also, that's a relative, and my son taught here for a while. But this is in Ithaca, New York, in the winter months. And, people, in terms of the seasonal, I'm not saying that the students that committed suicide off of bridges where there's very deep gorges, there apparently, I'm not up to date because my daughter now is in her 50s, but apparently there's one of the highest suicide rates for universities.
At that
And
bridge?
yes, and there are quite a few bridges, but on the campus. I was actually physically there with my husband and I that's got nothing to do with what, I was physically on the campus because my son was teaching there. But I just was wondering, the reason it popped into my mind was when you were mentioning about San Francisco, the bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge. And I just thought, I'm not going to say anything more, but I'm just wondering, the dark months when it's icy and cold and people have it, well, I'm not saying that all these people had seasonal disorder, the people, that's just more of a mental.
The weather makes a difference for some people. My wife looked out the window today and said, "Oh, it's so dark." And I said, "You're complaining, I gotta go talk about suicide." On a dark day.
I just didn't know if that you had heard of that, or I don't know if that's true.
About weather?
No, about that particular university.
Oh,
I've
no, I
heard
haven't.
of that.
Did you hear that?
There's
Yeah.
a bridge or a cliff.
No, there's one particular bridge where there's been quite a few students.
Yeah.
But, well, I'm not going to go anymore in terms of this is a long, long time ago, because my kid graduated from Opera back in 1990.
So back to the survivors,
Yeah.
there is resources, like for instance, Grace Lutheran has a grief group, and
That's for a loss, not
for
necessarily.
loss, for grief, but there's people in there who've lost people in their lives from suicide.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to get specific, but, people there are dealing with their suicide grief by helping to facilitate and to run that group. And I know other people who've put the survivor guilt towards, charities and things like that. So I think that there's a route to survivor, which is, I don't want to say productive, but helpful. But that's one resource.
Thank you. Like I said earlier, once upon a time, suicide was a crime. It was also thought of as a moral failing, that you're not obeying the Bible. It's God's duty to give and take life, and you have no right to do that. Catholic Church saw it as a sin. I don't know where they stand on that now. Oh, I know one thing I just don't want to talk about is assisted suicide. Because it's in the legislature, I think, here in Illinois. Yes?
It's not assisted suicide. It's medical aid in dying.
Right.
You shouldn't use the term assisted suicide, because that's not what it is.
Well, you're right, in a sense, because, the criteria to be able to do this, in the resources I read, was you have to be of sound mind, you have to have repeatedly expressed a desire to die, you have to be suffering from a terminal painful illness, and in terms of assisted, you're right, you have to take the medication with your own hands. A physician will prescribe it and give it to you and instruct you perhaps on how to use it. But you have to take it and put it in your own mouth. So nobody's injecting you or anything like that. So I understand what you're saying. What are your thoughts about that? About legislating that?
Very
I think it should be allowed.
Yes.
Oh, God, yes.
You think it should be allowed?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah,
People should
it's-
die with dignity if they've got, you know.
Yeah. I tend to agree.
I think it should be allowed under these conditions as you have articulated. I think it's, should be a medical option.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see how somebody who was suicidal would seek this out and use it, and shouldn't be used for that.
But what does it mean by sound mind? Who's determining the sound mind of the individual?
Yeah.
Well, if you talk to somebody and ask them a few questions,
I mean, it would be a psychiatrist,
yeah,
something like that.
You need two medical practitioners
is that what it
to
is?
agree, yes.
I think that's the way it is in Oregon, right? There's like 10 or 13.
Maybe the
Yeah, that's-
adopted this known the individual for a long time. It's like the primary doctor.
It looks like I'm not going to get to my 2 studies that I did. Actually, I want to talk to you about the marriage. Can I go a couple minutes over?
You got 3 minutes.
Actually, what we did, I did an internship, postdoc at Northwestern Institute of Psychiatry. And I hooked up with them to alert me to any time there was an admission for a suicide attempt. And over the course of about a year and a half, I got 21 cases. Married, had to be married, suicide attempt. All 21 were women. Back to that. So what I did is, we were interested in what we call the structure of the marriage, and you could approach it many different ways. But we were interested in who had the most psychiatric symptoms. We call that under-adequate. And who had the least, that would be over-adequate or adequate. And we gave them a SCL 90, which had 90 psychiatric symptoms that you check off if it was present. Depression, suicidal ideation, anxiety, so on and so forth. And we gave the suicide attempter, which was the wife, 2 of these. Fill it out for yourself and fill it out rating your husband. And we did the same thing with the husband. Fill it out for yourself, rate your wife. And invariably, the wife was under-adequate and the husband was over-adequate. Okay? Both of them delineated. Well, that wasn't good enough for me. I'm sure you're familiar with the Rorschach ink blot test. Why don't you pass that around?
Like my lungs.
Don't give me your response, please. So there's a scale on there that can measure adaptability, maturity, adequacy. And I'm showing you this because I want you to see it. And if you tell me, oh, I see a bunch of blood, that is a horrible response compared to, I see 2 people talking to each other in an animated way. Now that is so much more sophisticated than I see blood. Now if you say I see 2 people dueling with swords, that brings in a little aggression. So the human response, any response is going to tell you a lot about their capability of having smooth relationships, hostile relationships, no relationships at all with the blood. So I gave each of them a Rorschach, scored them. Got the husband over-adequate, the wife under-adequate. What came out on the Rorschach was they're perfectly the same. They were both the same. They might be a little under-adequate, a little over-adequate, but the psychological reality is water finds its own level. But somehow they were in cahoots to turn her into the patient. Under-adequate one. You want to pass that up?
Yeah.
Thank you. I see 2 pigs playing patty cake. I love these cards. I've given hundreds of Rorschachs. And it's such a rich source of data. So anyway, they're both the same psychologically, but for some reason, and I'm not sure exactly why, but we do this. We get an idea about our spouse, and if we're rigid about it, or if we need to escape our own pathology and project it into them. But that was the finding we had in that study. With the jail suicide, I speculated that the seriousness of the crime would determine if there was a suicide. If they were intoxicated, if it was a crime against family, if they were agitated, if they were demanding, manipulative, if they were suicidal. And all that kind of came out to be true. I collected 22 cases of death over the course of a year, 18 months. And then I also collected 22 cases of inmates who lived and interviewed the jailers about their conduct and their background. Let me just quickly give you a case study. Okay, case number 2. A 30-year-old Native American female was incarcerated along with her husband for public intoxication. The two of them were sentenced to 4 days. Jail records indicated the victim had a criminal record, the female, consisting of traffic violations and one offense of burglary. While in jail, she began to complain of being ill and in need of medical attention. The jailer noted she had the shakes and appeared agitated from time to time. It was believed by the jailer she may have been going through the DTs. The inmate was verbally abusive toward her husband when he visited, though her behavior toward everyone else was overall favorable. On the 3rd day of incarceration, 2 visitors conveyed to the jailer on duty she was in bad shape and had said she was going to kill herself if something was not done real soon. So she's threatening suicide. And she's agitated, and she's intoxicated, and she's alienated from her family. Approximately 1 hour later, after talking with her visitors, the inmate was found hanging by her neck. One other one, then we'll quit. Case number 1, a 21-year-old single, this is in city and county jails in Oklahoma, not prisons, it was a totally different, much more stable environment. 21-year-old Caucasian male was incarcerated for vandalism and being under the influence, intoxicated. The inmate had been sniffing paint and had maliciously entered his parents' home, where he became unruly, destroying everything in the household. His mother came home and upon seeing what was happening called the police. The inmate had a long history of crime, psychiatric problems, and had several attempts at suicide. He was incarcerated for 3 days, whereupon being served a court order by the sheriff for a psychiatric evaluation, he became violent, agitated, kicking the cell doors, screaming, and cursing indiscriminately. Approximately 1 hour, 10 minutes following this event, the inmate was found dead, hanging. Well, you can see the behavioral and historic or demographics. I think we're going to end there.
You have the answers. You can take those back to your sorority or fraternity, put it in files, so when we have this class next year. Anyway, thank you very much for coming. Next week, we'll be here, and our featured speakers are Gene and Ann Armstrong, who are going to share with us basically their history since they came to Oak Park in the late 1960s.
We've been here over 50 years, so, bring food.